sticking with Mesmer slightly,
please.
Please, anytime. We can talk about Mesmer all day.
Welcome back to Quest Markers. On this show, we talk about video games and the stories they tell with a focus on narrative. My name is Marina. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a video game composer, vocalist, audio engineer, and your host. Today, we're back with the Soul Squad, and we're talking about the Elden Ring DLC that released earlier this year, Shadow of the Erdtree. Spoiler warning, we will be talking about both the DLC and the base game, so if you haven't played them, please do. They are so good. In this episode, we talk about our own Tarnished and what builds we played in the DLC, the narrative and narrative themes scattered throughout the Land of Shadow, our favorite bosses and their stories, and of course, how the music supported the narrative. I am so excited to have Jack and Sherveen back on the show. If you haven't checked out our prior Elden Ring episode, it's episode 15, and it's a long and fun one. Thank you for being here, and let's get started. Hi, friends. How are you?
So bad. We're so bad.
I've been looking forward to chatting about Shadow of the Erdtree because no one else will talk to me about it in this much depth, right? So
we're always here. This is going to be great. I feel like this is going to be another 2-hour episode.
No, I was thinking this. I was like, it's like for a DLC to be almost as long as the base game is insane.
It didn't even feel like a DLC. It felt like a sequel to me.
I know. A whole new game.
It was unbelievable. Before we get into it, how are you staying hydrated? What are you both drinking?
I have some juice again. Oh, did I have juice last time?
You did. You did.
Just because it's morning when we do this. So.
And because it's evening for me, I've got a wholesome glass of water just by my little bedside. Nothing too exciting, nothing too wild.
I love it. I also have water. I made a little homemade soy latte as well.
Ooh.
I'm like a little sleepy eepy. If you've seen the cat meme, the very sleepy orange cat that's like, ow, wow, that's me. But I'm sure this will wake me up. I just told you both, I have the Bellarat music playing in the background, and it's a very ambient track, so it probably doesn't help with the sleepy eepiness, but you know.
Big EPs.
The EPs. But let's have you introduce yourselves first, and let's do it in reverse alpha order this time. So Sherveen, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Sherveen. I am a freelance game developer, indie developer. I work primarily on a game called Mid-Autumn, which is like a roguelite dungeon crawler that I'm making, and hopefully it's in early access, and hopefully it'll be out like in a year or so or something, but we'll see. But very happy to be here. I'll throw it to Jack.
And I'm Jack. I am a writer and game journalist, somewhat nomadic now, but I used to write, I used to be a guides writer for GG Recon, and I used to be the gaming editor for The Independent as well. And now I just write whatever I like, wherever I like.
I love that. Please hire both Sherveen and Jack. They did not pay me to say this. They don't know that I'm saying this, so they're probably like, Marina, please don't speak on our behalf. And do check out Mid-Autumn, and Jack will also link your website as well, because you've written some Elden Ring guides.
I have. Oh, yeah. I forgot all about that. Yeah, I've got my own little blog now called T-Post, and I've got a few Elden Ring build guides on there as well, using all DLC stuff as well.
Yes, so good.
And Marina, I know you said you didn't want to speak for us, but like I'm certainly not too proud. So if anyone hires me through this, that is hilarious. Amazing. Let me do freelance for people. I will need it in this coming year for sure.
You never know. And check out Mid-Autumn as well. It's just such a beautiful game, Sherveen. I know I've told you this before, but just, I don't know. I think the colors and the art direction that you've chosen, it tickles my brain in a really good way.
I appreciate, like, I've looked at it so much that I can't like perceive any of that. It just looks very normal to me at this point. So I
get that.
I appreciate the reminder.
Yeah, when you're too close to your own work, I think anyone who creates something out of nothing, like whether it's Sherveen in your case, games, or Jack in your case, writing, or in my case, music, like when you're so close to it, I think it's hard to see. But anyway, um, what are you both currently playing?
Oh well, I mean, Veilguard came out like literally
Let's
yesterday,
go.
so I have been diving into that. I'm a big like Bioware boy, so I always usually pick up whatever they launch. Um, that and maybe I'm still like not done with Astrobot. I've been playing
Hmm.
Astrobot.
Ooh,
I'm like on the last, like I'm very close to finishing it, I think.
so wholesome.
Nice. People loved it. People really loved Astrobot. I haven't picked it up yet. What are you playing in Veilguard, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, okay, so I'm like a big Bioware, like I'm embarrassing like Bioware nerd. So I'm
No, I
playing
love
like
it.
I'm playing like a Kunari mage,
Mm.
and he has like a proper Kunari name and everything. And yeah, I mean, this was actually big because it opens in the Tevinter Imperium. This is so off
Hmm.
topic, which is like probably my favorite location in the setting. So I was like, I'm so invested
Yeah.
immediately.
What faction did you choose?
I'm the Shadow Dragons.
Nice.
Specifically, I was like, oh, I want like a real Tevinter connected background. So I was like,
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh, love this for you. Absolutely
Mm.
love it. Jack, what are you playing?
I feel like I've come to the end of quite a few games at the minute that I've been playing.
Mm.
So I've just finished the Lake House DLC for Alan Wake 2.
Yes.
I
Mm.
loved it. I loved it to death. And I kind of been dipping into Alan Wake 2 a little bit here and there again, but I've mostly been playing Silent Hill 2 Remake
Mm.
because
Ooh.
I love the original game, and I think I was like with the masses here when everybody had, the bar was in hell for what people were expecting to come out of this remake, and they kind of hit it out of the park, really.
Yeah.
Um, I've not been able to put it down. I've on like my second playthrough now. I'm just trying to get all
Wow.
the little trophies.
I'm also playing Veilguard. I can't believe how good that game looks. It's insane. I'm playing an elven mage who's also Shadow Dragon, which is
Mhm.
very interesting given the very dark things that happen in Tevinter. Um, and I'm having a great time. Like
Yeah.
it has been so phenomenal. I speed ran Dragon Age 1 and 2. I played Inquisition last year and I loved it and I didn't know what was going on because I hadn't played 1 and 2, but I played Origins, I played 2. I love Dragon Age so much. Veilguard has been excellent. I won't spoil anything for anyone, but oh,
No, I've been enjoying it more than I thought I was going to as well. So I was like, oh, cool. Because like as I get older, I'm like, am I going to enjoy this, or am I going to be like, this was better when I was a kid? And I was like, no, this is fun. Like legitimately, I'm having a good time.
I thought Origins and 2 held up. But anyway,
Mhm.
this is not a Dragon Age show.
Yeah.
Um, we're, we are here to talk about Elden Ring's DLC, and I apologize in advance. Well, not in advance. I apologize because I'm the one who delayed this because it took me so long to finish the DLC. We'll get into that. The final boss. Oh my god. Okay, so
But
okay.
you did it, which is the
I
From
You
did do
Software
did.
it.
way.
I
Like
did
the
do it. I did do it. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that, but I'll kick us off with a story summary and then we can jump in. And feel free to add things as well. I made this a lot shorter than I had like a monologue for the Elden Ring episode because the story is so hidden. But here it's a little
Yeah,
bit, I was surprised it's a little bit more um,
Mhm.
obvious what
There's
the
a
story
plot.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
sure.
You still need to read item descriptions, which I knew this time around to do. um, so, our Tarnished follows the trail of Mikola the Kine into the Land of Shadows in this DLC, where we find a place that is devastated by Mesmer's flame, and we encounter the followers of Mikola almost right away, who are Needle Knight Letta, the leader of Mikola's followers in the Land of Shadow, Dryleaf Dane, who is a monk and a master of hand-to-hand combat, Redmane Freya, one of her Dawn soldiers, Hornsent, who is a native of the Land of Shadow, Tialie, who's a worshipper of Saint Trina, Sir Ansbach, a follower of Mog, which I have been pronouncing incorrectly. It's Moog, and Moore, who is just a little guy who deserved better.
So true.
Our journey takes us to discover Miquella's almost pilgrimage-like journey where he or they shed all parts of themselves in preparation to ascend to godhood. And throughout the journey, we fell many foes, most notably Mesmer, who we learn is Marika's son, who held a bloody, monstrous crusade against the people of the Land of Shadow. And optionally, but I think notably, Metyr, the Mother of Fingers, who was a daughter of the Greater Will and the first star to fall upon the lands between. And Metyr gave birth to all of the two fingers that guide the Tarnished and the Empyreans that we know in the base game. Eventually, we meet Saint Trina, Miquella's other half, who tells us to fell Miquella in combat, saying, quote, "You must kill Miquella, grant him forgiveness," unquote. And we do just that. So with Mesmer's flame, we burn the sealing tree that previously blocked our path, and we head to Anir Elim to find Miquella. And after a battle against Miquella's followers, which is one of my favorite fights in the DLC, we do exactly as Saint Trina asked, clashing it out in one of Elden Ring's, in my opinion, hardest boss fights, and we stop Miquella from crossing the gate of divinity and becoming a god. That's it in terms of summary, because we'll get into a lot of different things. But before we do, tell us once again your Tarnished name, your build, and whether that changed for the DLC, your favorite weapon that you used in the DLC, and whether that changed because there were some new weapon class introductions in there, and your playstyle, starting with Sherveen.
Yeah, so I have the boring Tarnished name. It's just my name, Sherveen.
I love it.
And I used the same kind of playthrough I did for our last episode in this one. So I was using a Faith Int build with like the Sword of Night and Flame.
Ooh.
And well, first of all, that was actually really amazing because there's like other Faith Int weapons in this DLC for the first time, like really.
Yes.
So I was like, this is really cool. Specifically, the what is it? The Moon Knight weapons, the Remembered weapons.
Yeah.
Also have like Faith and Int scaling. So those I used for a while, but ultimately I ended up using the light greatswords, the Milady, which was really, really fun. With the wing stance and everything. And then I ended up just going super heavy into Faith, like over time. And then it was just doing a ton of damage at that point.
Nice.
And then I also will mention that I mostly rocked the High Priest robes because I got really into the Metyr parts of the lore when I was looking through that. And I just love those finger robes. They're so creepy. And that's what I wanted to wear.
Yeah, those... I think I put them on for a second. I was like, no, thank you. Jack, what about you?
So my Tarnish was Flower Boy. His little lore before in the base game was that he would go into other people's worlds and help people out with bosses, but I'd also drop them a few flowers just as, I don't know, a gimmick, just to cheer people up when they're having a bad day.
Awesome.
And he was a Strength and Faith build. Previously, I was using Marika's Hammer mostly, and the Miquelan Night Sword, the one that you get from the Halig Tree. And I stuck with those for a huge chunk of the DLC because I felt like I was waiting for the right weapon to kind of respec with, and I wanted to get a few before I did. And then eventually you come to a boss. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but eventually you get to a boss, and his boss weapon, or its boss weapon, that you get from its remembrance is a big sunflower hammer.
Yes. You can talk about it. We gave
the Shadow Tree Avatar, that was it.
That was a good fight.
And as soon as you beat it, you get a giant sunflower, and I thought, this is the perfect weapon for Flower Boy, because what better way to go around delivering flowers than holding a giant sunflower as well? And it's stronger than you think it's going to be. You look at it and you think, that's a sunflower, it's going to do nothing. It does everything.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I've never tried that Remembrance weapon. So that's
so good. The poise damage on its charge attack is incredible. And then in terms of kind of play style, I was always very methodical. I like to comb every kind of inch of a map. And I think a lot of my friends, whenever I'm playing games with them, they hate me for it because I like to just look at everything and I'm just so slow and wandering around. But I like to find everything. So by the time we got to Enir Ilim, I had loads of the Shadow Tree fragments and it was just kind of taking my time, kind of figuring out everything that I could from the get-go. And then, like I say, the Shadow Sunflower Blossom basically became my weapon, apart from when I started to respec after I found the Velvet Sword of Centrina as well. Loved that.
Yeah, so it's such a beautiful weapon.
I loved dual wielding that.
I was trying that because it has the permanent sleep.
Yes.
And I was testing it out on I accidentally picked an enemy that was immune to sleep. And I was like, what is the difference between this and regular sleep? And so I was like really confused for a really long time. And I was like, oh, this is very good once I tried it on like anything else.
It's like permanent EP.
Yeah.
I probably had the most chaotic play style out of us. My tarnished's name is Onion Ring. I played the base game of Strength and Dex, and I did Dex and Arcane for the DLC because I went all in on Eleanor's Pullblade and previously did both Eleanor's Pullblade and the Bloodhound's Fang. But very chaotic play style. I actually didn't realize until I was 5 or 6 hours into the final boss that I had the Baldekin's Blessing in my inventory for the entire DLC up until the final fight. And for folks who don't know, that reduces your max HP by 5%.
It's an OG problem.
Yep. And when you use it, all it does is it gives you a buff for 15 seconds. But here's why. It's because the last fight that I did before the DLC, because I wanted to clear all of the bosses, was Fortisax, because I just hadn't done the fight with Fortisax. But Fia gives you a hug right before that fight, or I guess you can maybe elect to have Fia give you a hug. And so I did that. I fought Fortisax and I was like, off to do the DLC because I already, beat Moog. And then I played the entire DLC with my max HP reduced until I was streaming it. And a friend was like, did you talk to Fia by any chance recently? And I was like, yeah, like right before I started the DLC. So anyway.
You're playing on hard mode.
You probably have the Radiant Blessing too. Like the even, like, is that even the worst one? Yeah, the big one. If it's the end of the quest line.
Oh man. I had something because when I used the Baldekin's Blessing, I gained a fair bit more HP. And I was like, I didn't think this reduced my HP by that much. So maybe I did have the Radiant Blessing. What does that do? Hold on. Radiant Blessing.
I'm trying to remember. I'm assuming it's worse, but I could be wrong. It could be better because it doesn't give you the HP debuff, but maybe not.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't give you the HP debuff. I definitely had an HP debuff because when I used it, I was like, oh, why is my max HP so much higher?
Oh, no.
So anyway, that's my advice is don't do that.
Don't get the hugs.
Just don't do it. But let's get right into it. I would love to start with the narrative moments that stood out to you because I feel like there were so many in this DLC. As I said before, it didn't really feel like a DLC. It very much felt like a sequel. It was so rich in lore and it expanded, I think, on everything in the base game. So Jack, maybe we start with you.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I know what you mean. As soon as you get into Gravesite Plain, you're just kind of awestruck by everything that's going on. It feels like, I think because it's a slightly smaller map, it gives you more opportunity to kind of see everything before you from one spot. You can see the Shadow Keep in the background. Obviously, you've got the Shadow Tree in as kind of like the main backdrop as well, with the Baldekin kind of draping down from the sky. But for me, I think throughout the whole thing, my favorite narrative beat was Centrina for sure. That whole quest line, the journey through kind of Cerulean Coast to get there, it kind of felt like the most, I guess, like the most coherent part of following Miquella's footsteps. Because throughout, obviously, you're finding the crosses at various intervals, which are different parts of Miquella's body, and spirit, soul, anything that he can of his former kind of godhood that he's leaving behind and abandoning. But when you get to the Cerulean Coast, you kind of start to build up a theory as to what you're leading up to. So, you're in this blue field and you come across yet another cross, and I think it's the first one you find in that area is the one that says, "I abandon here my doubts and vacillations," I think.
Mhm.
And for when that happened, that was the first time I think I'd seen something that it wasn't like a physical body part. So it wasn't his eyes or his arm or anything like that. It was a piece of flesh. It was a concept rather than a physical thing. As you keep going around, you start going down and descending until you get to the Stone Coffin Fissure. And if you've got past a certain narrative point at that point as well, you can, when you get through it, you find another cross that says, "I abandon here my love." And obviously things are a little bit purple there. You start to notice all the sleep stuff. You can kind of start to work out that it's going to be Centrina. But when it said, "I abandon here my love," I thought, oh my god, this is huge. Because Mikla has been built up throughout the base game and throughout the DLC as this kind of embodiment of compassion, embodiment of taking in those that have been not shunned, but I guess misbegotten by the Golden Order, by the current order, and everything that's gone on there, from the Erdtree to Godwyn to Malenia to everything. So finding a message that said, "I abandon here my love," and it's going to be Centrina, I just thought, oh god, this is going to be huge. Whatever is about to happen is going to be game changing, and it was for me anyway. Loved it.
I agree. I love that quest line so much, and there's also a spirit in the Fisher who says, I wrote it down. It's quote, "Kindly Mikkel, I've seen you've thrown away something you should not have under any circumstance. How will you salvation offer to those who cannot be saved when you could not even save your other self?" End quote.
It's heartbreaking.
It's so heartbreaking. And then, you find the cross that says, "I abandon here my love." And it's just harrowing depending on how you interpret it, because you can interpret it by thinking, "I have no more love in my heart," which is terrifying considering that his whole being is being kind and compassionate and loving. But one can also interpret it as Mikkel abandoning the person he loves, like as in the term "my other half" being used to describe a life partner. So it's, that entire quest line was incredible. I actually found the Stone Coffin Fissure, Jack, you alluded to this, before Mikela broke his great rune, and I saw the message that said "sealed and obscured by Mikela," and I was like, oh, what's in here? And then you find Saint Trina, and it's so good.
And her design's incredible to look at.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
The beautiful flower, and like you don't
gorgeous.
know what you're looking at first, and it's like makes you really want to like study it.
I couldn't stop looking. I was going full Tialier. I was in that cave. I was like pulling out the monocular, kind of looking, just everything. I think it's.
I mean, you get like Talier's like jealousy. It's like, I get it. I'd be upset too.
I was like, I was obsessed, and she's kind of. You have this boss fight, which, depending on kind of your build, can be not too bad, but it can also be absolutely hellish. So when you get to it, it just feels so satisfying. It felt like the best kind of rewards in the game for me. And then, like you say, leading up to that, Mikela's Great Rune shattering, kind of preceding that as well, felt like such again, kind of like an awestruck moment where you're seeing the particles kind of falling from the sky. And if that's what happens when like you shatter a Great Rune, you can just kind of imagine what it was like when Marika shattered the Elden Ring.
Ooh, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah.
That must have been crazy.
100%. I actually, going back to I played very chaotically. When I got very close to it happens when you get like too close to Shadow Keep, or I guess there might be a timer on it. But I was collecting an item and I saw these sparkles on the sky and I was like, why can't I collect this item? And it's because I accidentally clicked out of where it says "somewhere a great rune has shattered." And thank goodness my partner saw. He was like, "I really want to watch this bit." I'm like, well, I'm not even going to go into this big thing. I'm just exploring. And he was like, record right now. And so I recorded the last 30 seconds and went back into my videos because I was collecting an item just as the Great Rune shattered. And so I missed the dialogue. Can you imagine
Oh
going
my
through the
God.
game being like, oh, I didn't know that Mikola shattered the Great Rune.
And that soundbite as well, because it sounds like, when you crush a rune, or the Newman rune and all the heroes' runes, whenever you want to level up and you crush the runes, it sounds like that, but it's deeper, it's more kind of ominous. It's something that shouldn't have been done.
Oh yeah, definitely sounds like that. Jack, did you have anything else?
Oh yeah, I had one more other kind of like narrative thing that really got to me, and that was how after the DLC, how you kind of look at the Omen in the base game. So at that point, you kind of assume that the Omen are just a part of the Order or the world that preceded Marika and parts of the Crucible, something that Marika wanted to completely distance herself from. But as the story goes on, you realise that the Omen aren't always called the Omen. That's something that they're referred to by the Golden Order, the Horn Scent, in prior to Marika's reign, and kind of learning about the Horn Scent, and why Marika wanted to completely erase their existence and completely shun them, and why it's massive. I mean, it felt big in the base game, but why it's massive that Marika has 2 Omen children as well. It just feels like the most incredible kind of reinterpretation of something that you thought, I guess, was pretty sewn up in the base game, and then you're thrown this complete curveball. I mean, I think that there's a lot going on, and I'm sure we'll kind of talk about it, but when as you're going through and you're learning parts of Marika's story, you realize that the Horn Scent, you start to feel sorry for the Horn Scent, but then you also realize, oh, these also aren't good people as well. There's like some bad stuff has happened to them, but they aren't. They're not the good people. And there's a quote in the trailer, and I'm not sure who said it. I think it might be Needle Knight Leder. I might be wrong. It might be. I'm not sure who it is, but in the trailer, there's a quote, and it says, "They say they were never saints. They were just on the losing side of a war." And the fact that Marika led this crusade against them, learning all about that and why it's such an impact on the base game was just massive for me as well.
Yeah, the DLC was so good. I mean, I kind of want to replay it now.
I've got it on in the background, and I'm like, I could start a new save.
You could. Sherveen, what about you?
Yeah, I think like those are also very, very big moments. Like I mentioned in the last episode how much I really love the way this setting handles all the like quote unquote monstrous races, like including the Omen, the Misbegotten, or things. The other thing I wanted to mention with that is specifically the Forager Brood is such an interesting addition to the setting in terms of just Elden Ring loves to take a enemy and be like, that's a monster. And then the second you learn anything about it, you're like, this is just like a species or a group of people, and there's a bunch of societal baggage that is forcing you to label them monsters. Because in the base game, the Forager Brood are, and this was a big reveal to me when you first meet one, are like the Kindred of Rot enemies. And then the first time you meet them, you're like, oh, well, these are the guys that Moore has been saying are really helpful and like give you like little items. And it's just really interesting. And I think it's a similar thing with the Horn Scent and their relationship with the Omen is just the idea that the way that things are, and I think this is a big theme, is like the way that things are feels like the way it's always been and the way it's always going to be. But then you're almost immediately like in this game, like repeatedly introduced to like, here's a completely different way of how the world used to work in this setting. So I think that's very fascinating. I think the other thing I thought was very fun is specifically Sir Ansbach's quest line. In that I think that this also has a really interesting, I think a lot of this DLC adds a lot of interesting nuance and like dynamics to a lot of existing characters and factions. And I think the way it characterizes Moog is very interesting as well. in the sense that Ansbach is so different from Vare, and you have like a very particular image of like the not Bloodhound Knights, the Blood. Ooh, these names are so hard
I know.
sometimes because they're
I've drawn a blank
they're
as well.
so oh, I know it's blood something. Pure blood knights. That's it. I
Yes.
knew it was like horrible. And I thought that was super interesting because Ansbach is like really chill the whole time and very like weirdly understanding about everything and just very like a very noble feeling character.
Mm,
And but then all the extra stuff that exists with Moog still exists. And it's very similar with the way the horn set work as well, where it's like that you like um the horn scent character that you meet as well is just very interesting in the like I understand the motivations and the dynamics of it, and still the details you learn about that are so fascinating and just yeah, like the idea of like dealing with your oppressor in an incredibly again brutal way and then feeling like everything's done and dusted and then you have two kids that like look exactly like them and it like drives you kind of insane a bit is such an interesting like wrinkle in the existing tapestry of everything that's been going on so far.
And I think a point we're hitting here as well in terms of themes is just expansion on everything that we saw in the base game. So to both of your points, we learn more about pure blood warriors, and we learn more about the forager brood, and we learn more about the scarlet rod, and we learn more
Mm-hmm.
about the horn scent, and we learn more about America's abandoned children and
Yeah.
child, I guess, in this case. But I think it expands on everything. I mean, it expands on the frenzied flame as well. If you made it out to the abyssal woods,
Mm-hmm.
just so good. I'll add a couple of narrative moments that really stood out to me. I had to put the controller down when I got to the suppressing pillar.
Mm-hmm.
yes.
I was like, oh, I kind of, it's something. I don't know. Let's climb up, but it doesn't look like anything that's gonna provide a lot of lore. And I'm so glad I was wrong because you climb up the suppressing pillar and you get a piece of lore. I think you might read it on a stone tablet, and it says, "quote The very center of the lands between, all manners of death wash up here, only to be suppressed." Which is, I like put the controller down. I was like, whoa, what does this mean? Because the age that America was attempting to usher in was the, let's call it, like maybe an age of life,
Mm,
by most notably removing destined death from the Elden Ring.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this and you're like, this is unnatural, right? Like what she's trying to do, because life isn't meant to be eternal.
mm.
And I think that's one of the biggest narrative themes in the base game is that, by I wish we had a little bit more on this, but by going to the suppressing pillar and reading that lore, you're like, what does that mean? Does that mean that people are like living here in this kind of like in between? I mean, lands between, but I wish we had a little bit more there, because I found just the way that they tackled kind of the idea of death, both in the base game and in the
Mm-hmm.
DLC, was really fascinating. I wish that we had a little bit more on Godwin, but I'll mention that later.
Yeah.
The suppressing pillar is so interesting as well because I think there was somebody that I think they lined up the map of of the Shadow Realm with the lands between, and if you kind of line it up, it all kind of fits together. If you treat the suppressing pillar as the center point, I think in the base game, the middle of the map, it's just empty. It's kind of like a crescent shape, isn't it? And in the middle of the map, there's a cloud. I think if you line the map of the Shadow Realm with that cloud, with the suppressing pillar in that cloud, it fits perfectly,
Mm-hmm.
and it all kind of works. So it makes me wonder if it's saying if all manners of death wash up here, only to be suppressed. I wonder if it's talking about it being a sort of a suppressed area, a hidden area.
It's very like the other thing about it is that it kind of lines up with the divine towers on the
Yes.
different parts. So
Oh
it
yeah.
definitely implies that the divine towers like have something to do with the fact that the this particular part of the lands between doesn't appear anymore, or seems to be
Mm.
missing from the map. I love because there's a few different ways you can line up the map, and one of the most interesting things I saw is there's a version where it looks like the kind of like ruined like highways in the raw region seem to
Mm.
line up with the big like I'm trying to think like the Altus Plateau highways, I think.
Mm.
Um, I'm trying to remember, but yeah, it's just really interesting to imagine, like, and especially because this land is so death themed with the grave birds and
Mm-hmm.
the gravestones everywhere, compared to the what I thought had a lot of death themes in the original base game, but really it was like, oh, this is the effect of them trying to eradicate whatever culture has caused this as well. Potentially, is really
Mm.
interesting to think
Mm-hmm. On a separate but related note, I'll just say my Godwin thought here. I think this
about.
is a bit of a maybe hot take. I just wish we could have seen something of Godwin here, because if all manner of death, capital D death, wash up here only to be suppressed, wouldn't it make sense that Godwin might be here, right? Because Godwin's death was what set the events of the base game in motion in the first place. It's the reason why America broke the Elden Ring. I really, really wish that Godwin was either the final boss or the penultimate boss, because I think that would have just been so fascinating,
Mm.
and it would have tied a nice bow
Mhm.
onto the events that started the base game in the first place. But I don't know how everyone else feels about that.
No, I definitely would have loved to see more Godwin stuff. And there's like I think there's like some evidence of stuff because there's like I think like a Death Knight armor and boss that you can find.
Mm.
So like there's something there. Um
And you see the kind of, the things that you see at the bottom of Stormvale, where it's
Yes. Yeah.
the oh, I can't remember the cadaver, not quite
Mhm.
the actual body, but the things that have sprung out, and they're kind of forming these kind of false versions of Godwin. I think you find a
yeah.
couple of those.
And another thing, because I'm not going to mention this is a point, but I think related to a lot of the death stuff, there's like literally part of the map that's shaped kind of like what you imagine the twin bird might look like, which is
Oh.
related to potentially the outer god of
Ooh.
death or the death birds. But it's the Cerulean Coast. If you look at it from an angle, it looks kind of like a red and blue bird.
Oh, interesting.
And so like that's like when I saw that I was like, I feel like there should have
Oh,
been
it
something
does.
or I've missed something. Yeah, it really does look like
Yeah, I'm just looking at it now. It really does.
and so like yeah, there were definitely parts where I was like, I wish this meant something that I knew what it was, but there's like way more death and Godwin adjacent stuff than I was expecting for there to be no explicit mention of Godwin.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if it's debated. This is the last thing I'll say, and we can move on.
Mhm,
But I don't know if it's debated that the big cadaver that we find at the base of the Erdtree, where we see Fia for the final time and go into the Fortisax fight, is that meant to be Godwin's body? And if so, is Godwin's soul in the Land of Shadow? Anyway, I wish we could have seen something of Godwin, because the theme of death is such a huge theme in both the base game and the DLC.
mhm,
Um, but the other narrative beat that I'll mention, or moment, was finding the minor Erdtree in the shaman village and learning more about America's past and history.
mhm,
Yeah.
Because when you get to the hinterlands, which is an optional area, and you find the shaman village, the first thing you see is this minor Erdtree bathing the village in gold, and the music changes, and you're like, oh, this is
mhm,
really interesting. And if you go up to the tree, you collect the minor Erdtree incantation, whose description says it's a secret incantation of Queen America. Only the kindness of gold without order, capital O, creates a small, illusory Erdtree that continuously restores the HP of nearby allies. America bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal, which is heartbreaking. But then you also find the golden braid talisman there, which I used in the final fight.
mhm.
Yeah.
It reduces your
Very good.
exposure to holy attacks. But its description is a braid of golden hair cut loose. Queen America's offer to the grandmother boosts holy damage prevention by the utmost. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There is no one left to answer, and America never returned home again. Just heartbreaking, fascinating. to learn that Marika comes from the land of shadow. And so is this why she wanted to remove dust and death from the Elden Ring? Is it because she saw so much death? Maybe death wasn't suppressed when she was a child and before she became a god. But I found that entire section very emotional, and narratively very satisfying. Let's move on to favorite narrative themes. Who would like to start?
Well,
Go for it, Sherveen.
I'll go first because I think mine. So I found it very, very fascinating to like the way that compassion is characterized in Shadow of the Erdtree specifically, because the more you like get into it, the more it's like treated as this very horrific thing, and specifically with the Great Rune Shattering and showing everyone's like quote unquote mind control elements of like Mikola's powers wearing off. And it's not necessarily that they are horrified by what's happened to them, but it's like it's clear that they make very different decisions immediately after, because you're introduced to like Mikola's band that's led by Letta, and they all seem like we're from all these different backgrounds, and Mikola has inspired us. We've all come together, and the fact that it breaks apart so quickly when it's taken away, there is like a horrifying aspect to it in the sense of like, oh, what was that experience actually like for these people? And like, yeah, especially when you have characters like Ansbach and even Freya, where they're like actual lords were killed by Mikola, and they come to like they don't necessarily agree with that in the same way. And I just also think it's fascinating that Freya has such a different ultimate reaction to it. So that's a very, very interesting thing. And I think it makes Mikola such an interesting and just recontextualizes all the references to Mikola and like Mikola saving people and what that means. And I think it does just such a great job of like every Empyrean, every like member of this like family of godlike beings is horrifying when you really think about it in the like perspective of the average person. And I think Mikola's characterization does that much better than some of the pre-existing ones that we've seen as well. I thought that was really, really cool. And I just loved seeing this like the like aftermath as well of this like crusade, which is such a different feeling from some of the other conflicts in the base game. Just this idea of like, what does it look like to embark on this kind of prolonged, extended campaign of vengeance, and what it turns Mesmer as a character into, and what it turns all the people into. And then I think the other thing I thought was really fascinating is just Mikola as a character, as an allegory for what Marika herself has gone through, in that like a lot of what Mikola is doing is following in the footsteps of Marika. And so everything that happens to Mikola that's like interesting or horrifying or like, what does this mean? You can infer something similar going on with Marika's mindset. So I thought it was very interesting in that like your understanding of Marika as a character also deepens a lot by the end of experiencing everything.
I agree. I mean, as Ansbach said, right? Like pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
And shrive is such an interesting word to use there as
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
Like,
I
feels
agree.
visceral.
Ooh, yeah. It's so ironic that he's called Mikola the kind, and his whole message seems to be one of love. And then Jack, to your earlier point, well, he abandons his love, and the way that he brings followers onto his side is by charming them, right? And taking away their free will ultimately. And then it's like, okay, well, if you're using this like twisted love to get people to follow you, that's also just so dark and so wrong.
and the context that was what Mikola was doing before abandoning all the qualities is such an interesting, like, whoa. It makes the implication of the Age of Compassion very, very frightening when you're thinking about it.
Yeah,
For sure.
I agree. Jack, you're writing an article about your favorite narrative themes, right?
I am, yeah. It's something I've kind of stopped and started so many times because it's such a struggle to kind of find the right words for it. But the theme that I loved throughout this, and we kind of touched on it in the base game a little bit. I think Sherveen, you brought it up, was these ideas that a lot of the characters have these dual identities. So you've got Marika and Radagon, you've got Rani and Rena, all these Margit and Morgott. You've got all these different ideas of these different characters with dual identities. But I think that something that permeates through the DLC and the base game is how identity, gender identity, runs through it, but also how the loss of oneself can impact the world around them. So for me, especially after finding out who or how and why Marika became the way she is because of what we learn in the shaman village, it feels like so much of what happens is because Marika kind of lost her way essentially, but also how various characters here eventually shed something of themselves to kind of become to resort to desperate measures effectively. So you've got Mikla almost tearing Centrina out of him and casting her away. There's also parts with Mikla and Centrina where I think, and I don't know whether it's referring to Mikla and Malenia or Mikla and Centrina, but they refer to Mikla as them in one item description. I don't know if you noticed it. And for me, I found that quite interesting because I love the idea of having Mikla using kind of like a neutral pronoun. Because you've got Centrina in there and potentially with Marika and Radagon as well. But then you've got characters like Mesmer who eventually pluck out the seal that Marika left in there to kind of give into the snake that's also been cursing him. You've got Midra, who you'll find in the Abyssal Woods, who has endured so much and only to then pull out the sword that's keeping this kind of ultimate, destructive force at bay and just completely lets it run havoc. And I think it's interesting how this happens so many times throughout the DLC. And particularly, like I say, with Mikla and Centrina, with the abandonment of love, what without love? Is it really an age of compassion? So abandoning yourself doesn't necessarily build something that it's kind of hard to describe. Abandoning yourself, I don't think it creates an almost falsehood of what you're trying to achieve. You can achieve your goals, as Mikla inherently does, up until we beat him. But at what cost? It's cost all of his followers, apart even the ones that end up kind of devoted to him. They end up falling by your sword. And it's built on this idea that I've shed everything that made me part of the Golden Order, but and now I'm going to create this order of compassion. But it's almost like dictatorial. If he's going to be running it through the same means as he was doing it before he broke his Great Rune, what really is the Age of Compassion if not another dictatorial order? Yeah,
and I think it also
it's terrifying.
I also want to say, in terms of dual identities, I thought it was fascinating that Mikla and Centrina is the very obvious pairing, but this DLC also conflates the identities of Radahn and Mohg in a really interesting way that I thought was, where it's like, oh, so you don't get a ton of it, but I think it is fascinating to imagine the way that identity also plays into what happens at the climax and everything like that.
I actually this leads me nicely into my favorite narrative theme, if that's okay, which is leaving things behind and abandonment. And I think we see that shown in a lot of different ways. So to give a few examples, Jack, to your point, Mikla leaves behind everything in an attempt to ascend to godhood and create a new world. Tialie would leave everything behind to hear Saint Trina's voice again. R'Lana left everything behind in the lands between, including her sister Rennala, to come to the Land of Shadow and become Messmer's sword. And Marika abandoned Messmer in the Land of Shadow. And my big takeaway there was that the only constant is change, and with change comes, sometimes leaving things behind, which is sometimes noble, sometimes horrific, sometimes heartbreaking. To me, there was a lot of very visceral emotion playing this DLC, especially because I knew how to play this time around and read item descriptions, and some of them left me really thinking about what emotional story are we trying to tell. But this also leads me to my favorite boss, if it's okay to jump to the next topic, which was Messmer. Not only because the fight was super fun, the sound design was amazing, like every hit felt so heavy. And the only trailer that I watched before playing was the very first one, the kind of teaser trailer that we got.
Ooh.
The announcement trailer, I guess. I didn't watch the story trailer. I only watched it today, actually, and I didn't watch the launch trailer. I only watched it today. But I thought, kind of on that theme of abandonment, I think Messmer's story is really interesting because, to take a step back, in the base game, we're introduced to what we believe are all of Marika's children, but then it's confirmed both through a Shield's item description that I found first, and also Messmer himself, that he is indeed Marika's son. Of course, the resemblance to Ratigan with the red hair is very obvious.
Yeah.
But there is actually, I think, I don't know if I'm stretching here, I think there's a reference to Messmer in the base game, because in the Weeping Peninsula, there's two pieces of information we get. The first one is, if you talk to a spirit, they say, quote, the mausoleum prowls, crating the soulless demigod, O Marika, Queen Eternal, he is your unwanted child, unquote. You know what else is on the Weeping Peninsula? The Impaler's Catacombs. You put those two pieces together, you're like, oh, that's really interesting. So Messmer, as much as, he was abandoned, and obviously that is sad and heartbreaking, he was also a monster, right? He led a crusade against the people of the Land of Shadow at Marika's behest, and probably a part of that was duty and love for his mother, but that doesn't make him any less of a monster. But also, I think this was done in order for Marika to access the gate. To get to the gate of divinity, to stop others from ascending to godhood, because I just watched the story trailer this morning, you actually see Marika holding, I think, the base of the Elden Ring in front of the gate of divinity, and I'm assuming that's where she ascended to godhood. But anyway, after doing Marika's bidding and razing the Land of Shadow to the ground, which is sad on so many levels, obviously for the people, but also because we learned that it was Marika's home and she came from that shaman village. What was Messmer rewarded with? Exile and abandonment, and it's heartbreaking. And on Messmer's remembrance, we learned that Marika's fear of Messmer's flame is the reason why she locked him away, so that he could never challenge her by threatening to burn the Erdtree, which became like this symbol so closely related to her reign. But it's so sad to me that ultimately he was a pawn and a source of shame and fear for Marika, and that his name was essentially just removed from history. He was locked away after everything that he did for her. Not that, I mean, we've seen that before, right? With like Godfrey and the Tarnished being banished. Anyway, why is it always sadness? Because it is. But then, it's almost poetic that we use Messmer's kindling to burn the sealing tree to get us to a near Aleem. And there's also, I don't know what item, this actually might be on the Messmer's kindling item description. It says Messmer, much like his younger sister, bore a vision of fire, which all but confirms that Malenia was his sister. And as we know,
finally,
right?
The other thing as well is that it implies that they're potentially Marika and potentially Radigan's firstborn, like eldest children as well, because there's that line about Radon, at the very least, viewing Messmer as an older brother figure. And I love this because it really does make sense that the crusade, there was like a personal reason there, but ultimately was about like burying these secrets of how to ascend to divinity from other Empyreans. Makes a lot of sense. And I think, like, going back to the process of godhood, forcing you to strip yourself of all your earthly attachments and compassion and everything, I do think like informs a lot of the way that America behaves, in that it's almost like you're caged in this godly pragmatism where you're really like, if you're going to do a thing to uphold the golden order, you will do it, even if it's
Yeah.
like you said, like banishing Godfrey and like betraying Mesmer to be imprisoned in this land, and also forcing someone to carry out a crusade in your name, because it implies that like the like gold on Mesmer's soldiers, I love that the implication is that these were wealthy and relatively respected and beloved members of the Golden Order Society, including Mesmer, who would have been like the like visible heir to this lineage as well. And then having it become like this, yeah, like stain on everything that no one even remembers or is aware of is
Like the serpent as a symbol is kind of mocked, and obviously it's blasphemous because of Rykard, but also I think they talk about the Colosseums where and the
the gladiators. The serpent
yeah.
has some like pre-existing connotation of evil or something like that, which I think is really interesting in how it relates to the like tree imagery in Elden Ring, and the idea of like the kind of Norse mythology aspect of it, where there's like the world tree and the world serpent.
Well, it's interesting as well how like it goes to show again that all of Marika and Radagon's children have these afflictions as well. You know, you've got Mikola, Eternal Youth, in kind of concept and body. You've got Malenia with the rot. Mesmer has obviously got the serpent inside him. And then you've got Melina, who is burned and bodiless. You know, all of them have these different afflictions, which have been a result of, maybe even a result of like Marika's attempt to like continue her age, claim power, maintain that order. So they're all kind of victims of it.
Yep. Everyone suffers in Marika's
always sadness,
yearning for power. Why is it always sadness?
Why is it always sadness?
It makes like Godwyn such a like anomaly, like even more so than it was in the first game. You're like,
happy go lucky.
Fine.
But two notable mentions before I ask you what your favorite bosses are. The penultimate fight with Letta and her allies, which I think, Jack, you're going to talk about, so I'll give you the spotlight there. But also Bale, like, curse you, Bale! You got
Sword of scale!
And even going back to Mesmer, the whole mongrel intruder line is like, there's so many fun little sound bites in this. It's really good.
Mother, wouldst thou lordship truly sanction
what's so bereft of light? So Shakespearean. It's so good. And you're like, this guy was very dramatic even prior to everything happening.
Jack, you had similar notes to me, so maybe we have you continue us on, if that's
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so kind of sticking with Mesmer slightly,
please,
please, anytime. We can talk about Mesmer all day. Like the Shadowkeep as a legacy dungeon in the run up to it is fantastic. It feels so satisfying. It feels eerie. It feels ominous. It's probably about the same size, maybe, as Stormveil. Maybe a slightly smaller version of Stormveil. And it just feels like the perfect way to kind of like build up to that moment of finally getting to Mesmer. I like the fact that he's just sat there brooding in the dark as well. He's just like waiting for somebody. And I don't know if it's a confirmed thing, but obviously Marika, he's only got one eye anyway because Marika plucked it and then placed a seal in to kind of keep the serpent at bay. So it makes me wonder, you know, when the opening cutscene happens with Mesmer's boss fight and the snake is staring at you, I wonder if that's how Mesmer sees. Because it's not a real eye. Yeah. It's like the Radagon and Marika saw seals, isn't it? That you get as like kind of the more powerful talismans.
I love the aspect that the snake is actually physically a part of Mesmer. Like it's not just a snake that's like sitting on his shoulder. If you take off the armor, you can see that the snake actually like goes into his body as well. Yeah.
It's so good. And then, like you say, Marina, the kind of penultimate fight between Leda and company. At this point, you've drawn the battle lines of who's going to be on your side and who is going to be on their side. And I think it's so tragic because, and it feels like an amazing kind of final battle. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a stretch to say this, but it feels like in Berserk where all the demons, where like the bands of the Hawk are having to fight off all the demons. It feels like that final battle before, to the point where everybody is gone. You've got rid of Leda. In that fight you lose Leda, Moore, Freya, and Dryleaf Dane. And then if you've done their quest lines, you get to take Ansbach and Salier with you to the final fight. But it still feels like they're kind of battle weary. It feels like they're aware that they're not going to make it out of this alive either. It feels almost like a tragic sort of folly. But the music that goes with it, the fact that you've got Leda taunting you on her own or saying, I'm not going to let you pass. You are going to have to kill me if we're going to, if this is the way that this is going to go, if this is what you've decided. And I wish we'd got a little more, maybe this is something we'll come on to later, but maybe like just a little more agency of how we could have tackled Mikla toward the end. And maybe kind of seen it from a different point of view as well, but I will get into that. but then after that, I think my other favorite fight was Midra, who's the Fancy Flame boss. And I think that's mostly because it felt like firstly, when that cutscene happens, and you can kind of get an idea that it's going to be something to do with the Frenzied Flame anyway, because of how the Abyssal Woods plays out and everything within the Manse area. But that moment where he stands up and then suddenly the Frenzied Flame erupts, you think, oh my god, what have I done? I've unleashed hell. I'm in trouble. Flower Boy was in trouble. Flower Boy was running. But, that Sunflower was such a good weapon for him as well, because I was getting all the stuns with the charge attacks. But it's the one fight that I felt like I was able to consistently learn and kind of get the patterns down, work out when to dodge, when to jump. And it was kind of the one that I would go and leave my summon sign outside of so that I could play with other players as well, because I just couldn't get enough of it. It was the way it flows, the way he kind of erupts, and the whole kind of conversation hall is, I think it's called the conversation hall, is burning away. And I think if you look in the area, you can kind of see in the middle, it's almost like a burning pile. It's almost like a burning circle. And I think the implication is that's where the three fingers were. So that's where he was touched by the three fingers, and that's what's led to him, being this kind of conduit for the Frenzied Flame, or this kind of crucible for the Frenzied Flame. And then, because I think you see the same thing when you get touched by the three fingers as well. Later on, you just see this little burning spot afterwards. I keep going back to that boss. I just think the music's great as well. It's eerie, it's horrible. I love it. And the fact that he's just like screaming throughout the Manse, like you hear him now and again just screaming, and then he's having a go at you when you walk in, saying it's the depths of our foolishness for even trying to take this on. So good.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Always sadness.
Always sadness. Never happiness.
Nope. Really good fight, though. I agree. It felt like a dance.
Yes, absolutely.
Unlike Sherveen's favorite fight.
What? I mean, look.
You were ready for that.
I think I have a contentious opinion, because I don't think most people's favorite boss would be Promised Consort. But I don't know. I really enjoyed it. Music was always really great. And I will say, the big thing with this DLC is that I think a lot of the summons for the bosses, because even if you don't use summons, I would recommend you use them the first time, like, and just experience that,
Oh, I
because they
agree.
put so many fun. First of all, like the Bale fight with Egon just screaming is so fun that you should do it just
Oh,
to
for sure.
experience that. But literally every summoned NPC in this in the boss fights are really like Horn Scent and Mesmer has like this fun little
Yeah.
monologue. Sir Ansbach and Talier and the Promised Consort one are so fun. He's like, General Radan, good to see you. And
Yes.
it's like, oh, that's so cool. And then Talier literally is like, please, like he dies and he's like, Saint Trina, for Saint Trina, you have to, like, those honestly were so fun, such fun narrative moments that they like act into them.
I agree. One
But
quick thing, because you
oh, yeah.
mentioned Egon, I would let Egon represent me in court.
Yeah. I object.
Sorry to interrupt, Sherveen.
No, it's so good. But I think and I think I'll say this with my approach in terms of boss fights is I'm not a big like memorize every attack and like figure it out to be like pixel perfect. And I really like seeing boss fights as puzzles. And I would say that the Radon fight to me felt very puzzly in terms of like, okay, well, this attack's really difficult to dodge. What if I use like there's so many interesting strategies. Like I had a shield that like negated holy damage, and I used that a bunch of times, and that made the second phase, which I think a lot of people don't like as much. Like I didn't have to worry as much about some of the timings and things like that. And it was just very fun to like narratively love that fight in terms of like, oh, every once in a while Radon uses like one of Moog's abilities and like what, and the fact that just from a design standpoint, they know that in order to reach the DLC, you have beat Radon, you have beat Moog. And then realizing why it's set up that way is very fun to be like, okay, so you understand these two like types of move sets and then they combine it is really interesting. But I also ended up really liking, in retrospect, the Putrescent Knight boss fight. So this is, I feel like they're like boss fights that people wouldn't typically like now that I'm thinking about it.
I love that fight, actually.
Yeah, it's good.
I think I wish that Putrescent Knight had like, I think, and this would be one of my like complaints about the game, is like a few of the bosses, I wish they were connected like a little bit more into things.
Yeah.
Which is fine because it's a From Software game and like creating questions is like part of it. But some of them were so like satisfyingly integrated that I was like, what does Putrescent Knight have to do with this area?
Yeah.
And like I can theorize.
I wish it had been like specifically, even if it was like a generic thing saying this was a protector of Centrino or something like that. You know, it was the person who had the sword originally that you find earlier in the area, so something like that.
It would be like I think a similar thing with the Raw area and Romina specifically, where I was like so intrigued by this, but there's not that much information to really get me like to be evocative for what like an introduction to the rot in this section could mean is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as much as the final fight was absolutely not my favorite. For context, I mean, both of you know this, but for context, I think it took me 13 hours of just, and I tried respecing and I was reading online. I'm like, what are other people doing? Yeah. And everyone was saying, use a shield and use an ice, not staff, like a pole blade essentially, or like
something to poke at.
like a harpoon. Yeah. Thank you. Harpoon? No, that's not the right term. What am I thinking of? Like pardon?
There's an ice harpoon built somewhere.
There's something like that. Like people were saying that, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. And so I was trying, Sword and Shield. I ended up going back to Eleanor's Pole Blade, but the fight took me 13 hours. My biggest, like eventually, like phase 1 I could do without getting hit, and I played on PS5, but the frame rate was my biggest enemy. Like I do not, when all hell started falling from the sky, I was like, I don't know. Onion Ring doesn't know. What I found really funny, so I didn't know this, but what I found really funny after I finished playing it and I was researching like what other people did was that you can get charmed if you get hugged twice in that fight.
Yeah.
I had, because I beat the Shadow Tree Avatar, I had Miquella's Broken Rune, and so I used that to de-charm, I guess. But I didn't know that if you get hugged twice, the text that shows up is heart stolen, which I think is really funny. And I think if Onion Ring ever went through that, I don't think it would be heart stolen. I think it would be tummy hurts.
Onion Ring.
Yeah, I don't think Onion Ring's a little bit clueless. I don't think Onion Ring's heart would have been stolen. I think her
big
tummy would have just hurt. Yeah, big EP. Anyway, shall we move on to favorite music?
Let's do it.
Sherveen, maybe you can kick us off because you mentioned it.
It's gonna be the Promise Consort music again. I just love it. I really think it's a really fun kind of contextualization of like, it evokes the main and the final theme, but it has like, it's like a slightly, and I just love the bit where it goes like it's very like, again, uplifting in the same way that they do with the final boss fight. But I weirdly do think it's a big part of the timing of the boss fight is like timed to coincide with the music a lot compared to some of the other boss fights. But I particularly love the bit where it goes like ban da da ba-da-da, 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 like that part. Every time I'm like, I'm in it, I'm in the fight, I'm so like hyped. And I particularly do like the big, like bombastic boss tracks in this game in particular compared to some of the other ones, because like the vibes in Elden Ring are very different from, say, like Dark Souls, where everything's very like everything's choiral and like intense for most part, whereas there's a lot more like horns and like big like brass sections in a lot of the Elden Ring, and like very crucial Elden Ring tracks, I think.
The music is very good. Jack, I think you had that on your list too.
Yeah, I did, for literally the same reason. Like when it dropped on Spotify, I was like, I'm going to try that on my gym playlist, and and it works. That moment, because it's used in now that you've seen it as well, Marina, I think it's used in the story trailer.
Yeah.
And it cuts to this kind of bridge when in the trailer, it's the moment where you see St. Trina falling, which also is incredible. But it's the moment where you see St. Trina falling, and it kind of stops and it goes dun dun dun, and then it like the quiet slowly builds up and builds up. I'm not going to go that high because nobody wants to hear that, but it builds up to that point, and it gets so orchestral, and it feels like this is the pinnacle of your journey at this point. You know, it feels like this is the moment that it's all been leading up to, and I think we mentioned it as well when you're fighting Radagon as well. It's that moment where you finally reach the final boss fight, and the music matches the tone of it. I know that From Software kind of famously don't do that with the final boss of Dark Souls, which I won't spoil because I know maybe you'll want to play it at some point.
I'm about to, actually. I just finished Lies of P, so Dark Souls 1 is my next Souls game.
Yes. Oh my god.
I'm excited.
When you get to the final boss theme there, we'll be interested to know what you think, because it's so radically kind of different from what Elden Ring's kind of put forward.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Jack, you had some exploration music too.
I did. So my main one was Stone Coffin Fisher, for pretty much what the reasons we said before. It just felt like it's so relaxing, but I don't know whether it was just me. I don't know whether it was intentional or just my kind of timing, but when that music kicked in and when I kind of crested Stone Coffin Fisher to read the cross that said, "I abandon him, I love," and looked over, and you see all the coffins and the caves and the purple and the deep chasm. It kind of hit its sort of pinnacle moment at that point, and I thought, oh, it just timed it so right. It felt like I've stumbled onto. It's a kind of tone that says I've stumbled onto something that is going to have a big payoff. It just felt like that purely because of the music, and ultimately it did, because it led to kind of my favorite part of the DLC. And then sort of when you generally, I know you've put this as well, Marina, but the gravesite plane,
Oh, so good.
it's the first area. It is, when you're just wandering around, and it's so good. It's so relaxing. So relaxing.
I agree. I really, really loved Graveside Plain. I think the whole entry into the Land of Shadow was done really well, because you're in a cave, and as you emerge into the cave and you see this beautiful, beautiful landscape and where you're going to be, and the music kicks in.
Get the bell.
It was such a great moment.
And that first blade jumping off and like attacking you from the trees.
Oh, I didn't have that.
You didn't walk in that direction?
No, I didn't go in that direction first. No, I went to what did we call them mausoleums? What were they called?
They are mausoleums. The nameless ones? Yeah. Which is confusing because the walking mausoleums are really different.
Yeah, I went there and I was like, oh, this is going to be hard. But actually, maybe on that topic, I didn't find the DLC as difficult maybe as other people did. I know there was a really big conversation about that, but it's because I spent a lot of time exploring, and I spent a lot of time finding Shadow Tree fragments, because I was like, oh, okay, different mechanic to level up. I'm not going to push it. Like, clearly, if this is the thing that's going to make me stronger, then the game is telling me through its mechanics that I should go and power myself up before doing things. But yeah, I didn't walk in that direction. But I did love the Graveside Plain music. It was very atmospheric and eerie, but also a little bit more melodic with some of the instruments. I think it was a viola in the background that you can kind of hear coming in and out. But also Bellarat. I've been listening to the Bellarat music this whole time as we've been recording, just on very low volume. But again, just very atmospheric, great for exploration, but a little bit more melodic than what we had in the base game, which I thought was great. And I think that's probably because the areas were smaller as well. And so we had more frequent music changes, potentially, depending on how much you explored. And then in terms of boss music, Divine Beast Dancing Lion was amazing. It was just so majestic. And there was this sense of dread, but also almost like nobility and royalty as well. And there was something very spiritual about that fight. But also the music when you fight Letta and her allies was just so sad. And I think Elden Ring's music in particular is really fascinating, because it, like, if you listen to the Letta and her allies' music on its own, like, it doesn't really sound like a battle theme.
No.
But it works so well in the context of that fight, because you're like, oh, these are the people that I met at the very beginning, and now I'm fighting them. And that's, I mean, there's inherent sadness in that, especially if you did people's quest lines, like, especially when Moore shows up and you're like, I don't want to fight Moore. What are we doing here? Why is it so sad?
My boy.
Yeah. So I thought that music was quite sad. But yeah, overall, I really, really enjoyed the soundtrack. And I think that brings us to final thoughts. We have covered so much ground. I mean, I'm sure we'll keep talking for 20 minutes, but I wanted to open it up for final thoughts on whether it's anything that we spoke about or anything that we didn't talk about.
Am I okay to jump in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, go for it.
So for me, I think I've kind of I think it's a solid 9 out of 10. I think what kind of does it a disservice a little bit, maybe, in the amount of time it took to get to this point. Obviously, there's been a 2-year gap between the base game and the DLC. And I think the reason why it was a bit contentious that after beating the final boss, you get your brief cutscene with Mikola to get a little bit more lore, and then that's where the DLC ends. And I think it felt kind of abrupt. Yeah, to put it delicately. Yes, to put it delicately, it felt a bit abrupt, and I think that but that's kind of nothing new, because the Dark Souls 3 DLC kind of does that a little bit.
Mhm.
But I think it's because people had such high expectations for it that people were hoping for maybe another ending. I think I might have liked another ending, maybe to have had the chance to interact with Mikola in some capacity after
Mhm.
he's kind of out of ideas, despondent, and offer him an accord like you do with Rani to maybe
Yeah.
usher in some form of age of compassion, but not necessarily what his idea of it would be. You could be his new Vidaan or such. But I think a big part of it as well is that I think when From Software do DLCs, they don't tend to have new endings. I think the only exception to that
Mhm.
was Dark Souls 2, which only shipped with one ending initially. But I think their idea is that inevitably it's going to integrate with the game proper. So if it's just going to be a part of the game that you'll get to eventually, it wouldn't impact the endings, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I think it's mostly because of the gap between why people may have been a bit dissatisfied. But for me, I loved it. I had no problem with it. I was happy with my little cutscene of seeing Mikola, and you're kind of not sure. You're aware that he's probably talking to Radahn, but you don't see Radahn, and even Mikola sounds scared at that point as well. I think that maybe as well, there could have been a few other bits that maybe could have had a few more details. So maybe I think I would have liked to have seen us get pulled into the world by the hand, by Mikola's
Ooh.
hand,
Mm.
something like that. And
Mm.
I think I think it might have benefited as well for having a more overt reference that it's Moog's body and Radahn's soul. So even if you just see the end of Moog turning into Radahn, something like
Oh,
that,
that
just
would
to
be
kind of
cool.
cement it, just
Yeah,
a
you
little
only have the
bit.
like thorns, right, on the arms. It
They
look
do,
really
I
cool.
didn't
yeah,
even
yeah,
notice that.
yeah,
I was too
yeah.
stressed out to notice
I
that.
don't blame you. They kind of like poking out here and there, and I think while that's a great detail, I think it just needed these extra little bits. But
Mhm.
they're like tiny nitpicks in the overall picture of what's an incredible DLC, and probably one of the best ones that they've put out next to Old Hunters.
Oh yeah, I mean, Bloodborne's DLC is
Yeah,
amazing.
I prefer it to Dark Souls 3's DLC for sure.
I
Mm.
think, yeah, it does depend on your taste. I mean, like in terms of endings, right? Like I feel like a lot of the Painted World DLCs feel like they offer like an alternate ending. I don't think they really do it in the way that like people were hoping would happen for this DLC.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I mostly agree with all of that, Jack. I think yeah, like I feel like solid 9 out of 10. I feel like there are like little quibbles, but I feel like they're successful quibbles where it's like
Mm,
I want these things to be like, a bit more here, a bit more there, because ultimately the DLC did a really good job of making me invested, enough to like
yeah.
play through the entire thing. And like I mean, it really is just interesting to see like how it impacts like Ronnie's quest line too, in terms of
Mm.
Mm,
how you see the lengths that someone goes to not ascend to godhood in the same way. um but the other thing I wanted to mention, which I thought was really interesting, is I think I think people might disagree with me, but I do feel like this DLC was did a really good job of like upping the creepiness factor from the first game, because
mm,
I think there is like a lot of really fun, and also they definitely borrowed a lot from Bloodborne in terms
Yeah.
of how to make it creepy.
yeah.
Because you have the aged untouchables and the abyssal woods, which are basically winter lanterns. You
Yeah.
have the jar enemies are really creepy.
Yeah.
The finger creepers, I think, are made more creepy after you like learn about Matir and everything, is also
Oh
really
yeah.
interesting. And
Mm.
then you're like the finger creepers and the fingers are like related. That also like there's a lot of creepy realizations that come with this. Those
Mm.
little like the I don't know, those tapeworm enemies. I hate those. They're really gross.
Oh, they're
Oh
awful.
yeah.
Um
That scared me so bad when they shot that like beam out of nowhere. I was riding on my horse. I was scared.
when I saw them in that they were around in like oh my god, it was just the hinterlands the first time, and I wasn't you go to the hinterlands and you see that giant like stampede of finger creepers.
Oh,
You're like, oh,
worst.
I saw
I
someone put the
hate
Jurassic
this.
Park theme to that as the depressing. It was so funny.
So yeah, just thought, and like the blood fiends are also like there's a creepiness to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's just a lot of really fun little elements there. Oh my god, the flooded section in the Shadow Keep where there's like a
Yeah.
that's so creepy the first time when you don't know what is under the water as well, and you're like,
Yeah.
what's going on there?
Horrible.
And a really cool use of reused enemies as well, because it's a ulcerated tree spirit. But you're like, what? I don't want to fall into the water with whatever this is. So yeah, I thought that was a really cool aspect to it. That I really appreciated, like experiencing the scorpions. They were the first time that scorpion like drops down.
Oh,
A
I
lot of really
hated
good
that so much.
creepy moments.
No. Onion Ring was not a fan. Onion Ring was like, I don't even know why I'm here. Like, we're hanging out. I don't know. This didn't come to mind until Jackie were saying your thoughts about the ending, but it would have been so interesting having maybe 3 or 4 different endings depending on who you brought into the final fight. So for example, if you went in and did it alone, I wonder if you could have gotten like one ending. If you went in and did it with just Ansbach, if you went in and did it with just Tialia, if you went and did it with both, and then maybe variations on whether they died or not in the fight, because and there was interesting dialogue there too, because I did, for better or worse, I brought in Ansbach for that fight every time, which like doubled Radan's HP. But I just needed some breathing room in phase 2. Like I know I made my life harder for myself, but I needed some breathing room in phase 2 to heal. But I think it would have been interesting to have variations of like who you brought in, whether they lived or not in that fight. This is not a fully fleshed thought, but I think that would have been interesting. It was such an Elden Ring ending of like, yeah, depending on what ending you got in the base game, maybe you just sit on a throne.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's kind of like nothing really happens, which I thought was very funny and very Elden Ring. But I can definitely see why some people may not have enjoyed that.
Yeah.
My final thoughts, I loved it so much. It like nothing is perfect, but this is definitely a top DLC, if not like I don't know. I kind of want to call it a standalone game because it was so massive. And then yeah, I just wish that we had gotten more of Godwin, because Godwin's death started the whole story. And
it makes me want to do and like want to petition them to just do another Godwin DLC, which they won't do, but
they won't. I wish.
But I also wanted to mention like how intimate the DLC feels is really interesting compared to the first game, in that just it's very character driven with the specific like band of Nicholas. And I love that they were able to make this thing that feels very like epic in scope, but you feel like you're just part of this little group that's like, we just care about figuring out what's going on with Mikola for our own personal agenda is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It was so good. I really enjoyed that there were more quests, that there was story that was more kind of forthright. Yeah, just big fan.
I like the fact they also just threw in Moby Dick in there. They were like, do you know
yes, we're going to do
what
Moby
we
Dick.
want? Yeah, we've got this Captain Ahab character.
And you get the dragon heads on bail from
Placidus
which sex? Placidus Sax, thank you.
Yes.
Placidus Sax's head. Oh, that's so cool.
That they'd had this
cool
epic
detail.
battle. That's why Bale's like all messed up, and it's why Placidus Sax has lost his head. It's so good.
So great.
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many little details like that. That's what I would say was very fun about it, was just like all these little details that you're noticing, like seeing Midra and being like, oh, this is really interesting to see in terms of like how the frenzied flame works. And like, being like, even with Romina, just seeing like the Scarlet Rot, but it is depicted very differently. And you're wondering why that's the case. And also I would just say like the Dancing Lion is such an interesting technical boss fight as well, in terms of just like the shape and like movement of everything and the cloth physics and everything going on.
And that the dancing lion can also steal your health potions if you use them at the wrong time.
I didn't know that until I got to the stream.
Yeah. I was like, wait, hold on. The boss just healed. What happened? And then I think someone was like, do you want to know? I'm like, yeah, what? When the boss glows red and you use a health potion, it heals it. I don't know whether it heals you, but it heals the boss.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I also did have a thought that I did have a least favorite boss, like a very
Ooh.
specific least favorite boss, which was specifically Jory, the Elder Inquisitor,
Oh,
who you
yeah.
fight in the Darklight Catacombs. And I hate it. I was like, I am not on board with this
Wait,
boss fight completely.
why?
He teleports so much that it's really hard, and then it's really hard to dodge. Like the big enemies come and chase you, and he keeps summoning them. And it's like, I'm dying. I don't like, these enemies are normal enemies. I can take them. But it was just like, I can't do damage fast enough, and he'll just resummon the enemies.
No.
Oh my gosh, I struggled. That was weirdly to me. That's the beautiful thing about FromSoft games is I like beat Radon and was like, that was great. And then this like other completely tangential boss, I was like, this is the worst. I'm having the worst time.
That's the most FromSoft thing ever, because I had a similar situation in Bloodborne, spoilers for Bloodborne, where everyone was like, oh, you're going to struggle with Orphan. And I was like, Orphan was my favorite fight. I beat Orphan in like 5 or 6, maybe 7 tries. Like, I really, really enjoyed that fight. And everyone was like, oh, you're going to struggle. You know, have fun. I was like, no, this was great. But I found like Living Failures, which is so embarrassing. Really, really
That's
difficult.
so interesting.
Like, too many people here. I can't. Anyway, yeah, I feel like that's a very FromSoft thing. I guess that's why, like, there are so many builds and so many different ways to play, because like ultimately you have to find what physics work for you, what timing works for you. And I think that to me is the thing that makes these games so special, is that there's so many different ways to play them. I don't know how I'm going to feel playing Dark Souls 1, because I know it's a lot slower than Elden Ring combat wise. But at least for Elden Ring, I think what makes it incredibly special is that you can choose how you're going to play and what physics makes sense to you, and whether you're going to have a shield or not, or whether you're going to dodge, etc. So yeah, big fan.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more waiting in Dark Souls. And I do appreciate that about Elden Ring, is you can be a lot more aggressive. Like once Bloodborne came out, you were like, oh, we can do things. We can move around. It's really interesting change in design philosophy for sure.
I know a lot of people found the final boss frustrating, but it does get you to utilize some of the, like a lot of the core mechanics of Elden Ring's kind of philosophy of try everything, respec, try this, do this, level these up.
They specifically did make him weak to a bunch of the new stuff. I mean, that's the like thing I always think with FromSoft is like the new stuff matters. Like, don't just stick to what you know. Because like final boss is like, I think weak to perfumes, is weak to like the greater pots that you get from like the giant fire golem things. And yeah, like a lot of the new weapons work well with, and then you could combine it with like some of the stuff. But then, yeah, if anyone picks up the DLC after listening to this, my big advice is collect every single Shadow Tree fragment.
Yeah,
that is the big thing. Like the difference between Marina and my experience is I had all 50 Shadow Tree fragments, and I think Marina, you had like most of them.
Yeah, I initially went into the final fight at level 17 Shadow Tree Blessing, and then I was like, LOL JK, no. And then I got up to 19.
Yeah,
I missed some really obvious ones.
Full 20 Shadow Tree fragments. So like, and if you do that, it will be less scary for sure. Like a guarantee.
Definitely.
It's like FromSoft saying like, here are the toys, now just go play.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I probably could have made that final fight easier for me by respeccing into something else, which I did. I tried a few different builds, and I was like, man, but physics wise, because I had used Eleonora's pole blade for
You
hours
get
and
so
hours and hours
used
and
to it.
hours.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm so comfortable with this. I can do good blade damage if I can get enough hits in. And for me, it was all about dodging. I bet I could do that fight in one shot right now. Like, I know that fight like the back of my hand. I will say though, maybe we ended off on this. Did we think that that was harder than Malenia, or did we think that Malenia was still the hardest boss in Elden Ring?
Well, Malenia was uncharacteristically easy for my build because I did I do a lot of stance damage, and you could stagger Malenia, and then Malenia is difficult because she heals is like one of the big things, and she's really hard to dodge. But if you can dodge her, then she dies quite. She doesn't have that much health. So I mean, I think that's the fascinating thing is like the perception of which bosses are difficult. Like they get like a collective perception of this is the most difficult boss. But like for me, I've told you in the Elden Ring thing, I struggle so much with specifically Renala because of all the magic resistance, and it takes me so long to beat Renala every playthrough when I want to have respec. It's just so different.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Jack, what about you?
Oh, I think just yes. I think it's the hardest. I mean, it's been nerfed now, and we were saying beforehand. I don't know if I'd have the same experience with it, but I did. I had to get like a cheesy build with the Blood Fiend's arm initially, just to really, really kind of make any kind of impact. I think it's the hardest thing that they have done.
It feels like the hardest, even me playing it. Like I was able to stay on like the Milady, and I did have the like holy damage, which made the second phase a lot worse, but it made the first phase like really trivial. Because he's weak to holy for the first phase and then resistant in the second phase. But I think that it was still like there were things like I would say like if I thought it was so hard that it was like a bad choice would be like, oh, there's no way to get around all these things. But I didn't find like a single move where I couldn't think of here's a thing I can do, like in terms of there are the new like wondrous physic flask.
Oh yeah,
you like guard better and like parry. Those things
the
are
perfect
really
parry and everything.
Yeah, all.
What about for those of us who can't perfect parry?
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part. It's like, hey, this is for the Sekiro fans.
Yeah.
You're gonna have a great time.
And just like the fact they toned down the visuals, like they've had to like tone down the lighting and all the echoes that have gone. You know, where like he goes up into the air and it kind of goes. Doof, doof, doof. You get three like
that
illusions.
Was really funny.
Yeah, they've got rid of that now. Yeah, so he just like does the one attack now rather than having the three illusions beforehand.
I didn't
well,
realize
because the hard part of it was honestly like I would run out of stamina at certain points. The hardest part for me with the Promised Consort is there was one attack that was impossible to dodge completely. There was like the one where he does like the two sword swipes and it's like foo foo. And then
you could dodge that. I had like basically no armor in that fight though. Like I picked agility.
I was pretty light. Yeah, like I was like super light roll. I think that's also a big thing. Medium rolling is really hard in that fight.
I was medium rolling away from that like nuke in the second phase. I was like, really get me out of here.
I was like specifically light roll
for that attack. Did you know that if you just jump continuously, it misses you?
That's
what I did.
The beautiful thing is like you will find out. No. This thing that I was like, I swear it's impossible because you dodge the first one and you're still in the middle of the dodge, and then you dodge the second one. So I was like, I did a strategy where I was like, I will tank one hit and then keep going, and then you just play knowing that you have to take those hits. But then someone will be like, yeah, you can just jump over that. And I was like, I swore I tried doing that. But
as long as you're not at the point of impact.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I was just like, do, and it worked. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But I disagree. I still thought Malenia was more difficult. And it's because, I mean, the healing was just brutal. And I could not dodge waterfowl to save my life. So like if waterfowl happened, it was just instant death for me. So Malenia definitely took me longer, and I thought that she was harder. I didn't think that anything was was unavoidable
Mm.
with Radon. But things felt unavoidable with Malenia. And
Malenia.
like the second she did Waterfowl, I was like,
I'm done.
yep, I'm
get me out of
done.
here.
Like, can't.
I personally don't perceive the Elden Ring bosses as like more challenging than the Sekiro bosses, for example.
I am so scared for Sekiro. I'm absolutely terrified.
Because Sekiro is like, you have to do it. Like, you have to, like, you can't be like, let me try a different option. There's not really that much flexibility compared to, which is fun in its own way. Because, like, when you finish it, you're like, I'm a god. You know, like, I'm the best player that's ever existed. Whereas I do like in Elden Ring that a lot of the time you get to feel clever when you're like, haha, I didn't even have to worry about this attack because I'm wearing the armor that negates fire damage. You know, it's like
that's it. All right. And any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I wish they would do like a 3 DLC like they did for Dark Souls, but you know, that's wishful thinking.
I know. I'm going to miss Elden Ring. You know, it's been such a big part of like our kind of gaming lives for the last couple of years. And it was so nice to pick it up again, to kind of revisit that world, revisit my characters. And I think that obviously, you know, you can play it whenever you like, but I think knowing that the likelihood that this is it now, I'd be curious to see if they do a sequel. I kind of hope they don't, because I think that From Software are at their best when they create a whole new thing. But we shall see.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I selfishly would want them to do a sequel, but I do agree that like it feels like it's better if they leave it in like a nice, tidy, relative place.
Yeah.
I agree. My parting thought is that the legend and legacy of Onion Ring started with Elden Ring, but it will not end with Elden Ring. My every single Souls character that I play is now and forevermore called Onion Ring. So
yeah,
that's my parting thought.
including in Sekiro.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And I know very little about Sekiro, so. Thank you both so much for being here. And this was awesome, as always. So after I finish Dark Souls 1, we'll have to have you come back.
For sure. We've got the whole Soul Squad now. I love it.
100%. We have the Soul Squad. And thank you so much for listening. If you have any feedback, please send it our way. Our socials will be in the description if you would like to follow us. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do so that you don't miss a future episode. Jack, Sherveen, thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.